So today's strange little story I have for you includes 3 of the dumbest criminals I've seen attempt a murder for hire. Now they may have succeeded with the murder, but this plan was in no way successful for either idiots involved. As you will see, all will soon be caught. And red-handed would come in pretty useful here, so let's go with that. All scumbags would be caught red-handed. This tragic story begins back in June 2015, or at least that is the date of the day Dr. Teresa and Grace would be horrifically bludgeoned to death by a hammer, and 2 innocent children would be left without a mother. But why? Well, as we all know, one of the first people law enforcement would focus their attention on would be Teresa's husband, Mark Sievers. But Mark had what was thought to be a solid alibi in his wife's murder, as he was at the time still on holiday in New York with family witness to this, including Teresa's family. Teresa had actually flown back earlier than her husband and 2 daughters, as she was very invested in her work and her clients, and she had an appointment to return to. Mark and Teresa had actually opened their own holistic medical practice called Restorative Health and Healing Centre in Estero. Shortly before her death, Teresa was profiled in a local women's magazine. She was very absorbed in her love for holistic healing, which I can very much appreciate. Facing multiple incurable illnesses myself, after years of pharmaceuticals and never any cure, I have a lot of respect for people trying to explore the natural holistic healing. The doctor is seen here explaining how her clients have literally tried everything before they get to her in hopes of healing themselves.
Kind of where I want to get to being an MD is the healing part, because by the time people have seen me, they have seen everybody. Yes. I mean, they have seen the MDs, the DOs, the chiropractor, the acupuncturist, and what they end up coming to me with is typically 3 to 4 bags of supplements, 2 different meal plans, and 7 different cleanses that they've been through. Okay, I'm exaggerating, folks, but it's real.
And it seems she was received well by a lot of people that took time to attend her seminars and talks and her educational classes.
I really got a lot out of the talk tonight with Dr. Sievers and Lenka Spiska. It was amazing to see the bridge that is being built between Western medicine and more Eastern philosophy.
I thought the talk tonight was amazing. Huge admiration for Dr. Sievers and her bringing this out to the public.
She was seen making many talks where she projects her thoughts loud and clear and very confidently. Apparently Dr. Teresa was a little more than confident at times, and was said to have raised her voice on many occasions at not just her staff at the centre, but even her patients. I can see this may be a passionate response, perhaps via holistic healing, but apparently she did this often. And this also led to one of her friends and colleagues of around 7 years, Sandra Hoskins, wanting to hand her notice in, on what turned out to be the very day that Teresa had been murdered. So this of course arose suspicion, along with law enforcement finding out that Sandra's husband was actually fired from the centre around 9 months earlier, showing clear controversy and animosity between Dr. Teresa, Mark, Sandra and her husband, as Mark was apparently the one who actually fired Sandra's husband, bringing more questions than answers to investigators, who even believed maybe a sexual relation had taken place between the couples.
Like I kind of told you on the phone, we're just trying to get some background on Teresa, the family, everything like that. Your name came up. I guess maybe you used to work for him or something like that, and you might have known him for a little bit of a time. Or
I worked with, my wife's been with Dr. Sievers for 7 years.
Okay. I got a question, and I got to do it because it's my job. I don't want you to take offense to it, but I'm going to be straightforward.
Okay.
Did Dr. Sievers ever come on to you in any sexually or connotative way,
No.
anything like that?
No.
Never had a relationship with her outside of work or
No.
anything like that? Like I said, it's just a question I have to ask.
I understand.
And as far as your wife has never done anything outside of your marriage?
No.
Okay.
The dispute between the 2 couples was looked into and kept in mind while the investigators proceeded with their work. For around 2 months, no leads came in the hunt for Dr. Teresa's killer or killers. Strangely enough, around the same time of Teresa's murder, numerous other holistic doctors had also been murdered in suspicious circumstances, so this of course gave speculation to people and conspiracy theorists that this was in somehow connected, but nothing came of that. Remember, her husband Mark was still on his family vacation when the horrific attack took place, so he could not have possibly caused his wife's demise. Could he? Well, this is where the story takes a strange twist, and we will soon be introduced to the two men in this elaborate scheme. On the morning of Dr. Teresa being found bludgeoned in her home, the 29th of June 2015, whilst he was still on his family vacation, claiming he could not get a hold of his wife, Mark Sievers rang and requested a fellow doctor and friend, also named Mark, to go and check on his wife. This is personally sinister to me, as you will soon discover. Teresa never turned up to see her client she so specifically flew home for, which of course was suspicious and concerning. Also, she was well known to never not turn up to work without calling first, and as we know, her work was a very big part of her life, so her presence not being in the building was felt immediately, and this prompted Teresa's husband Mark to contact the fellow doctor and friend to go and check on her. But we now know that Teresa would be lying, dead, on the kitchen floor of the family home, her head completely caved in, and a hammer lying beside her, still containing balls of Teresa's hair. This is one hell of a gory scene, with blood and evidence all around of the most unimaginable attack. Teresa's headphones were found next to a flip-flop, showing she probably had no idea anyone was in her home, watching and waiting. She was just going about her day. This was an extreme and ghastly attack on an innocent woman in the safety of her own home. And now her friend has had to witness this awful scene, clearly scarred for life. The friend immediately contacted police, where he would relate that not only was some of the blood dry, but Dr. Teresa was cold and clearly beyond any help at that point. Teresa had been hit 17 times with a hammer, or hammers. Massive overkill, surely. And evidence of over $40,000, passports, Mark's gun collection, and various other items were left in the home, so not a robbery either. And if it was a very poor one. But who could have wanted the doctor dead? Gone. Well, when I said they were three of the dumbest criminals, I meant it. And it didn't actually take that long for law enforcement to start making immense strides in the solving of this case. Firstly, not his smartest move, Mark Sievers gave up his phone and all its contents to law enforcement, where many truths would soon come out. The Sievers relationship was certainly on the rocks, and even though over $40,000 had been found in the family home, evidence was found that they were deeply in debt. Along with this, evidence was also found in Mark's phone that he felt inferior to Teresa in the relationship. Mark certainly felt lower in status in their marriage. And although they were both involved in the holistic business they set up, it was primarily Teresa's job, whereas Mark was actually most of the time a stay-at-home dad. So you can imagine the bond he must have formed with his two young daughters, Josephine and Carmela. A daddy-daughter bond can be unbreakable. Now, as we are all aware, when it comes to the breakdown of marriages and when couples with children get divorced, more often than not, the mother shall end up with the children. I personally do not agree with this, but alas, that is the way it usually goes. In Mark's phone, he uses a feature to act as a personal diary, where he would literally keep note of everything, especially referring to his failing relationship and his complete unsatisfaction in the bedroom with Teresa, expecting much more than he would ever receive. This, of course, would infuriate Mark, but being the more subservient of the two in the relationship, instead of projecting out loud to his wife how he felt about all this, he would just write it all down in his personal phone diary. Whether he believed the investigators would not look and find this, or they just would not read into it enough or believe he was involved in any way, I have no idea, as he does seem to have a higher belief of himself. But of course they did, and suspicions of Mark Sievers being somehow involved in his wife's murder was becoming more and more likely. When Mark and Teresa met back in 2003, Mark fell hard for Teresa. His sister would say he was officially off the market, whilst his mother would agree. He was working as a nurse, and Teresa was a physician who was recently divorced. That didn't seem to matter to Mark. He just wanted the woman he had fallen deeply in love with to be his bride, as she was in fact his pride and joy, and he really seemed to adore her. They had what looked to be a very beautiful, intimate sunset beach wedding, where close family and friends would watch the happy couple make their vows in sickness and in health till death parts us. And that it would. 6 months after they married, their first daughter was born, and they rested in a family home in Bonita Springs. Then, in 2007, their second and last daughter would be born, completing the Sievers family. Mark always seemed to be behind his wife in more than one way. He had her back with her aim to heal people holistically and with the opening of the centre and the running of it. Yet he also seemed to be behind her in confidence, in the marriage and in life. Mark did not seem confident. He seemed the type to just go along with things instead of dealing with confrontation, and this was portrayed in his diary. As police proceeded with their investigations and interviews with people, Sandra Hoskins and her husband's names would appear again, and they're the two that worked with Teresa, and Sandra was the one handing a notice in the very day that Teresa got murdered. Apparently, Teresa's dislike for her so-called friend and long-term colleague Sandra had been passed on to others. Teresa would say Sandra brought a bad energy to the building. I believe her mother even mentioned that she said that she would have to replace her.
Is there anyone in particular want to harm her for any reason?
Okay, this is where we need to talk.
Okay.
This is what came to my husband first. There's a person that works in Teresa's office. Her name is Sandra. You've probably spoken to her already. Sandra. I don't know her last name.
Hopkins, something
She was the only Sandra. She's probably maybe 50,
Yes, ma'am.
thin woman. Teresa has worked with Sandra for probably 7 years.
Mhm.
My sister was getting to it. My sister tried to help everybody, to the point where, let me buy this for you. Let me help you do this. Let me get you here.
Mhm.
Let me buy you a car, whatever she couldn't do.
Mhm.
But over the years, last couple years, she would say to me, Sandra's driving me out of my, I'm going to censor everything because my sister was great for F-bombs. Drive me out of my freaking mind.
You don't censor, you can just be straight up.
Okay.
That's cool.
She's like, drive me fucking crazy, Dill.
Yeah.
She's driving me fucking nuts. She goes, listen to what she did today. Sandra was bad-mouthing Teresa.
Mhm.
Now, you may not like your boss, but you don't bad-mouth them to patients that are coming in the doors, like Dr. Sievers.
That's not
She's a
good business.
bitch.
Did she ever complain about any of her employees?
The only one, I don't even know if it was a firing, but there was a fellow named Frank that they, gave him, asked him to leave. And whether they gave, I think she was always so generous. She probably gave him a severance package. If I'm not mistaken, she
Right.
did. And then his wife Sandra worked there, and I think she had told Sandra, and I just heard this the other day in conversation with other people that, you really need to try to find another job because I really need to replace you or something like that.
Right.
So this, along with Sandra's husband being brought up again, and the clear relationship between work colleagues souring, would pique investigators' interest. We also see that Mark's mother, when interviewed, explained the issues she had with the family's home alarm. See, Mark had requested his mother to check on his pets and feed them whilst he and his family were still away on vacation, thousands of miles away in New York. She would encounter some issues and confusion with the alarm system, but once she contacted Mark to relay her concerns, he told her not to worry and just to leave it unset. Bonnie, Mark's mother, would blame herself, whereas I believe this murder would have taken place either way. All of a sudden, the case took a major turn. Around August 2015, a press conference took place, and the sheriff simply told everyone the name of the first suspect, Jimmy Ray Rogers. And everyone, including the Sievers family, are thinking collectively, well, who the fuck is Jimmy Ray Rogers? No one had heard of him, and he was from Missouri. But why and how is he connected to the evil, cold-blooded slaying of Dr. Sievers? Well, they were not left too long wondering about a connection, as only an hour later the name of the second suspect was released, and this name was a lot more familiar and personally connected to the Sievers family. Curtis Wayne Wright Jr., who was also from Missouri, more than 1,000 miles away, but he was connected. He was, in fact, Mark Sievers' bestest friend, to the point where they called each other brothers on Facebook, and would often say a brother from another mother when referring to each other and about themselves to other people. So yeah, you could say they were pretty damn close, even being each other's best man at their weddings. But hold on, is it just me, or do these two look extremely similar? Like, wow. I mean, if we were looking through CCTV, it would be pretty damn hard to decipher who is who between them both. Mark and Curtis look so alike. It looks like Mark is just doing two separate expressions here. I mean, yeah, look a bit harder and you can see that the ears and the nose are different. But wow, they do look similar. Twins, you could even think by looking at them, which is really weird considering that they never looked like each other when they were young. But apparently Curtis would even shave his own head and choose to go bald when Mark would lose his hair. Strange? Curtis was known as the geeky computer guy who would travel from Missouri all the way to Florida to fix the computers at the office, so he was well known by many people at the health center. Curtis Wayne Wright was certainly known to investigators too. He was actually linked to a missing preacher back in 1996, Ronnie Bolin, who was last seen with Curtis and was also apparently owed money to from Curtis. Ronnie disappeared, leaving his car and the keys still in the ignition behind, left in a car wash in St. Louis. Curtis was never charged with the preacher's disappearance, but always listed as a suspect. In 2011, Curtis was serving time on a drugs charge, where lo and behold, he meets the other scumbag in this foul murder, Jimmy Ray Rogers, who was serving time on a weapons charge. Apparently, Jimmy liked to brag a lot and would blow stories up bigger than what they really were. Jimmy was released from prison and managed to secure a job where he was also known for his elaborate stories. Now, Jimmy is the type to need a cool nickname, one that would perhaps deter some inmates from him, or just to make himself look hard to his peers. Now, what could that be? Jimmy the Blade? No, you wouldn't think of that. What about Jimmy the Axeman? Too much. Or perhaps it could be Jimmy the Hammer. Yes, that is in fact what he named himself, Jimmy the Hammer. Even on his Facebook, he had Hammer in brackets underneath his name. Man, he's so cool. So we have Curtis Wayne Wright Jr., Mark's absolute doppelganger and best bud ever, and his past cellmate, Jimmy the Hammer. But how are they involved in the murder, and how were they found? Well, Curtis didn't know how to keep his trap shut, or just think of a cover story, so nearly everyone in Hillsborough, Missouri knew about the trip he was going to take to Florida, even telling some people specifically to visit the Seaver family. Smart move, dimwit. And Jimmy wasn't much better at keeping his tracks clean or his mouth shut either. Remember, he loves a good brag. You know, Jimmy the Hammer. Jimmy the Dickhead. He told his boss that his brother had graduated law school and he was heading to Florida for an all-expenses-paid celebration, of course. Whereas he told his pregnant girlfriend, Taylor Schumacher, that he was going down to Florida to make some money with Curtis. Vague. Tips were followed and investigators were soon on the two scumbags' trails, and once a GPS satellite navigation system was found, located on a rental car that both villains had obtained to travel to Florida, well, the game was up, guys. These two, even though they had fulfilled the murder, really couldn't organise a bonfire in a bakery, I swear. They certainly did not keep their tracks clear. I'm not sure if you can delete GPS coordinates, but if you could, they certainly made no effort to. Even typing everything in, basically to the doorsteps of each and every location they stopped at together, making the job for law enforcement so much easier. Basically mapping their way to a murder and back. Idiots. On the morning of June 27th, 2015, Curtis would obtain a rental car from Hillsborough, Missouri, where he then headed to pick up Jimmy the Hammer Rogers. The very next coordinates typed into that GPS system was none other than Bonita Springs, Florida, where the Sievers' home was. Dumb and Dumber travelled all day and night to arrive in Bonita Springs, June 28th, right to the Sievers' home residence. They arrived at the home around 6 a.m. and turned off the alarm. This was probably when the evidence of a door being pried open was made, and also what caused confusion with Bonnie and the alarm system. As they then both left the Sievers' residence, and a Walmart address was added to the GPS. Walmart. Why is it always Walmart? You all know that Walmart's security system is on point, right? Here they were, both seen on the Walmart CCTV, just casually shopping together, no attempt at hiding their faces or identity. They purchased trash bags, ominous, flushable wet wipes, strange but understandable considering the brains behind this master plan, black towels, because I guess white shows blood up more, and black shoes and a lock-picking kit. Obviously, all things to aid at the scene of the murder. They paid for everything in cash. Were they using their brains here to not leave a trail? Doubtful. They probably nicked the $100 bill back at the Sievers' residence. Next in the GPS, a lovely beach stop. Yeah, they then headed to the beach. Probably just chilling before they committed the horrific crime. Getting the tan on. We can only speculate. But after their lovely beach break, the cunning duo headed back to the Sievers' home, where there in the garage they would spend hours just waiting for Dr. Sievers to arrive home from her trip, alone. I wonder how they knew. Knew she would be home alone. Knew what day and what time. Knew how to disarm the alarm. I wonder. Why would these two want Dr. Teresa gone? Was Curtis jealous of his best bud's wife? Was he avenging his friend for how inferior his wife made him feel? Or were they hired to eliminate the main problem in Mark's life, his wife, by none other than Mark himself? One thing my dad always said to me, for safety reasons, never enter your home address into your GPS system. And that wasn't because I was about to plot a murder I wanted to get away with, of course. Just in case the car is stolen, maybe. And they would then have the house keys, if your house keys were on the same as your car keys. And now they have the home address that they can just follow. Type it in. They can break into your home. They've got the keys, they've got the address, they know where you are. They can break in and rob you at your home, not just your car. So, good advice from the man with the most wisdom there is, guys, my dad. And it's a great tip. Unfortunately, Numbnuts 1 and 2 here didn't even think of that, and they were plotting a murder. After committing the horrific hammering act and leaving Dr. Teresa to die on her kitchen floor alone, the duo, in the early hours, Monday, June 29th, used the rental car and the GPS system and foolishly typed in Jimmy's exact home address, leading not only them, but also investigators right to Jimmy's door. I mean, how dumb can you be, really? Investigators would then shift their focus onto Jimmy's then pregnant girlfriend, Taylor Schomaker. She appeared in the interrogation room, bored and fed up and totally disconcerted about the seriousness of what she was actually there for, but she certainly noticed those cameras. She had an uncomfortable fixation on the cameras actually, often looking directly into them, which could show signs of her guilt in knowing something. I believe this generally affected her, being filmed and forever captured, as although she began the interview looking fed up and practically unbothered by the whole situation, it did not take long for Taylor to come clean to investigators as to what she knew about the awful crime. I'm thinking perhaps being pregnant played a part in her decision making here. I mean, I was going to say no one chooses to go to prison, but some people actually do because they know they get treated better than they would on the streets. So I know that people do actually choose to go to prison, but I highly doubt a pregnant female would risk getting herself in prison, no matter how scared they are. Taylor would tell investigators that Jimmy had gone for a ride with her and asked her to throw out of the car window his already smashed up phone, some gloves, and a jumpsuit, which Taylor would later take police to exactly where the discarded items still lay at the side of the road.
Specific items, and later took me to another location where I recovered further evidence. How did we come to find these items today?
So I threw them out the window.
And what was the reason for throwing these out the window?
I didn't know at the time.
But you came to learn why, right?
Yes.
Okay, and why is that?
Because he murdered somebody.
A fibre from the very jumpsuit discarded on the roadside that day was located on Teresa's dead body, so this was very crucial evidence, thanks to Taylor confessing. After discarding these items for Jimmy, Taylor proceeded to push him on the real reason he went to Florida and what really happened down there. Remember, previously, Jimmy had told Taylor in a very vague manner that he was going down to Florida to make some money with Curtis. So, what could include heading to Florida to return with evidence that you need to discard and that this should qualify a payment? Well, within no time, Jimmy simply confessed to Taylor that he had killed Dr. Teresa with a hammer, and he claimed it was a murder for hire set up by Teresa's husband, Mark Sievers, and that Jimmy was to receive a payment of $10,000 for his part in the murder, which, by the way, he never received.
Hey, Deputy. Would you, just for a moment, I'm going to just do an introduction. Just being under 20 years, and I just have you swear her in the total. All right, Taylor, obviously you recognize both of us to be law enforcement officers, specifically Corporal Jenkins, who is a law enforcement officer in the state of Missouri. Obviously, you remember when I came to speak to you a couple weeks ago, right?
Yes.
Sergeant Webb and myself came to your house and we came to speak to you. And do you remember what it was regarding?
Yeah.
What was it regarding?
Wayne murdering Mark's wife.
Okay. But now we came to your house earlier today, and we had a search warrant for your house. And speaking with you, you told me that Jimmy Ray Rogers, who is your boyfriend, actually did go to Florida with Wayne for the purpose of committing a murder.
Like after you guys came, asked him if he went to Florida, and he told me yeah. And then I asked him what he went down there for, and he said to make money. And then asked him how does he make money, and it was murdering Mark's wife.
And did he say how he murdered her?
With a hammer.
And why do you think he would use a hammer?
Jimmy.
Is that his weapon of choice? Or?
Yes.
From what you were telling me, did they call him the hammer, or he calls himself the hammer, or what's?
Everybody calls him Jimmy the Hammer. All of his friends back home.
And you had indicated to me that's because that's his weapon of choice whenever he has to do something?
Yes. I said, did you shoot her? And he said, no. And I said, then how'd you kill her? And he made a stupid little chuckle that he does, and then said with a hammer.
He said with a hammer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Apparently, Mark had purely asked his bestest friend in the whole world, his brother from another mother, his doppelganger, to single-handedly commit this horrific crime, but I believe Curtis genuinely did not think he had it in him to actually single-handedly murder someone, anyone, but he knew someone who would. Good old Jimmy the Hammer, and would, without Mark's knowledge, enlist the lowlife Jimmy into his murder-for-hire scheme. Investigators had uncovered an extremely worrying fact that would be detrimental to Mark, and that was the fact that Dr. Teresa had not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 insurance policies, equaling nearly $4.5 million. 4.433 million to be precise. A very good reason to murder someone. That is an extreme amount of money for you to have on your back if you die or get murdered. The state had enough evidence on all three heartless creatures, and all were brought to trial. As you know, these things take a long time. But around 8 months after the arrests were made, Curtis Wainwright would suddenly switch on his bestest friend and cut a plea deal to testify against his 2 accomplices, and it was on. First up was Jimmy Ray Rogers, the Hammer. In October 2019, the state actually believed that 2 hammers were involved in the murder, but just one was found at the crime scene, and this was shown and used in evidence in court. Also, remember that casual shopping trip at Walmart? You know, the shop with all the cameras? Yeah, the crucial CCTV was also shown in court, clearly placing both suspects in Florida buying the items found. The items discarded by Taylor Schumacher. Taylor, now Jimmy's ex, appeared in court against Jimmy, and seemed to find it very hard to make any eye contact or even body language with the defendant, even using her entire arm to block her view from him. She appeared scared of him, and I don't blame her. I mean, this guy has Hammer in his name, and has already confessed to murdering someone. She was probably petrified if he got off on this whole thing, what he could do to her. She was honest and recounted what she had to investigators and how he murdered Teresa with a hammer, and confessed this to her. But the main event was the star witness, Mr. Curtis Wainwright Jr. himself. You see why I just used one name. And for his exchange of testimony at both trials, Curtis was allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder. I mean, seriously, I don't agree with that at all. I mean, someone who's a big main involvement in a murder gets a lot less time just because he said what he did. I mean, I understand the whole process and everything, and it gets the other guys, but it's mad, isn't it, that they can get off so much easier than the other guys. Anyway, when Curtis spoke against Jimmy, he claimed he had hit Teresa around 3 times. And remember, the doctor was bludgeoned 17 times in total. Curtis claimed that after this, Jimmy came from nowhere and attacked Teresa with the remaining blows. Curtis described Jimmy as in a frenzy, how he had proceeded to beat the defenseless woman to death in front of him.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
It's Curtis Wainwright Jr.
So you said she gets out and she puts down her suitcase in the garage. What did you do when she did that?
When I saw that she put the suitcase down and she started to go into the house without it, my concern was that as soon as she walked in the house, she would either set her purse on the washer and dryer was right inside of that little entry area, that she would set her purse down and turn around to get the luggage that next to that door. There's panic buttons on the alarm panels. I panicked. I thought that, if she saw me, that she would either hit the panic button or take off running, and I didn't know where Jimmy was at, so I panicked. I jumped up and I followed her into the house.
You mentioned earlier that you'd use some kind of a crowbar or something in the garage to try to make it look like that side door had been pried open. Did you and Mr. Rogers locate any other tools in the garage?
Yeah, when we first got there, when we were kind of looking around, Mark had a hand toolbox, just a small box, but Jimmy had pulled a hammer out of it and kind of made a hammering motion and made a joke about it being destiny.
So Mr. Rogers picked up a hammer and made a joke about being, like, whose destiny?
Teresa's destiny.
Were there any other hammers in the garage?
Yes, as I started to go into the house, there's a small ice chest just to the right of that door. There was another hammer laying on the top of that.
It was there. It wasn't. You saw an opportunity, so did you pick it up?
I did.
In this moment now, when you pick up that hammer on that chest, you're following Dr. Sievers into her home. Does she see you?
No, not going into the house.
So did you actually follow her from the garage into the interior of her home?
I did.
And by this time, you've armed yourself with the hammer.
Yes, I still had planned on using my hands, but I had the hammer also as a backup. I accidentally kicked the dog dish over The dishes went flying everywhere. It made a huge noise. It startled her. She started to turn towards me.
Did she in fact turn towards you?
She started to turn towards me. I was afraid that if she turned around, she would scratch me or do something to leave evidence. I swung the hammer and I hit her.
What was your expectation when you hit her with the hammer?
I expected it to knock her out.
It didn't knock her out, did it?
No.
It's a little more difficult than you thought it would be?
I've never hit anybody with a hammer before.
So, after she turned around, did she ever realize that you were there?
Yeah, she hadn't turned all the way around when I hit her, so I hit her still from behind, but more on the side.
On the side of her head?
Yes.
All right, so did she just stand there and let you hit her with a hammer?
No.
Did she fight?
Yeah.
You fought for her life?
Yeah.
Where was Mr. Rogers while this was happening?
At that point, I still didn't know.
You couldn't see him?
I didn't see him.
How many times did you hit Dr. Sievers with that hammer?
3. I never in a million years envisioned beating her to death with a hammer.
Did Mr. Rogers reveal his presence to you?
Yes. He appeared to my right and started hitting her also. She said, "Why?"
She said, "Why?"
Yeah.
To you?
Yes.
And then you said Mr. Rogers came from somewhere and he started hitting her. What did he do?
Just started hitting her over and over.
How would you describe how he was hitting her?
In a frenzy.
A frenzy? And this was because the two of you wanted her dead?
Yes. We came there to kill her.
I think in that moment it finally became real to Curtis what he had actually done. He had known her for so many years, and if I remember rightly, she actually believed it was Mark, asking why was Mark doing this to her. I mean, that's just awful. I know they looked really similar, but that's crazy. She actually believed it was him anyway. And who chooses, like, a twin, a doppelganger, to commit a murder for them? Like, they could easily think it was you on CCTV. It looks just like you, dude. Anyway. Jimmy did not testify, and no witnesses were called. The jurors took, in total, 2 days to decide a guilty of second-degree murder verdict on Jimmy Ray Rogers, sentenced to life in prison. Finally, after around 3 years in jail, and with family still behind him, Mark Sievers, in November 2019, would face trial for his part in his wife's murder. I literally cannot believe family stood behind him. Curtis, once again testifying against Mark this time, would explain what happened that day and what led up to the whole awful event. Curtis relayed that Mark had said to him that the only option he had was for her to die, and that he needed to have her killed.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
Curtis Wayne Wright.
Mr. Wright, who killed Dr. Teresa Sievers?
Jimmy Rogers and I physically did it, but Mark Sievers was also involved in the planning.
Why did you do it?
I was asked to do it.
By whom?
Mr. Sievers. The only option that he had was for her to die. And he said that he needed to have her killed.
Wow, that is intense. I understand the breakup of a marriage must be so hard, especially when children are involved, and clearly Josephine and Carmela meant a lot to their father Mark. Let's face it, he spent the majority of his time raising the both of them himself, acting as both mother and father when Teresa was busy deep in her work. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the chances of the father getting custody of the children is less likely, and unfortunately can lead to decision making that can never be taken back. This in mind, Mark's clear unhappiness in his relationship with his wife, as stated in his diary, his greed to have the children all to himself, and the ginormous $4.5 million payout on his wife's death, things were not looking too good for Mr. Sievers. Mark did not testify at his trial. He just purely said to the judge instead, "I'm not going to testify, but I'd like to go home." And it was like with a little smirk, like, wow.
I'm not going to testify. Okay. But I'd like to go home.
You won't even bother standing up for yourself and for your wife's murder, your child's mother's murderer, yet you still expect they will just let you go home. Wow. That is shocking and so arrogant of him. He is so full of himself to expect at the end of this he even stands a chance at freedom. So narcissistic. He even appears excited about taking part in his trial, seen here in these images, before he enters the room and as he sits down. He really does think high of himself, especially with family still behind him, denying everything all of the way through, and his elaborate murder for hire plot would save his ass, but it didn't. The jurors took only 4 hours to deliberate this time and came back with the verdict of guilty in the first degree. Yes. Now that is a result, because let's face it, if Mark Sievers had not wanted his wife dead in the first place, then none of this would have happened. This murder took place because of Mark Sievers. In the end, Jimmy Ray Rogers would receive life in prison for his part in the murder. Curtis Wainwright Jr., for accepting the plea deal and testifying against the others, received 25 years in prison. Wow. And the original mastermind of this whole plan, Mark Sievers, the sole reason Teresa is dead, received the death penalty himself. Yes. Result. Mark returning to court on January the 3rd, 2020, to find out if he would in fact receive the death penalty or life in prison, decided to finally speak, and it was shameful, still denying any part in the murder and fake crying. Just take a look.
Is it okay if I refer to my notes?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Although a jury found me guilty, I am innocent of all charges, as I have maintained since this heinous crime took place. Our girls have tragically lost their mommy, and now they're about to lose their daddy as well. But my soul is in God's hands, and God knows the truth. Although I cannot feel remorse for something I had absolutely nothing to do with, I am deeply saddened and forever heartbroken, to say the very least, that Teresa was taken from us.
This sentence. I cannot feel remorse for something I had absolutely nothing to do with. I mean, really, what a psychopath. Thankfully, the judge denied Mark's request for a new trial, and therefore this scum shall rot and die in prison.
I judge people's actions. I don't judge people's souls. That's for somebody else to do. Sir, I'm going to go ahead and adjudicate you guilty on each count. On the first count, first-degree murder. This is the order of the court that you be sentenced to death, sir.
The girls are now being raised by Teresa's loving family. I mean, what an awful story. These two children, pretty much orphaned now. Their mother's dead, their father's in prison for life or will be dead. Brought up by other family members, all because the father did not want the mother to have the children. All because of greed. It's just awful, really. It's crazy what goes on and what people are capable of and how dumb people can be. Thankfully, because of their idiocracy, the murderers were brought to justice. Otherwise, this murder could have gone unsolved, especially with Mark having that so-called tight alibi at being on holiday with Teresa's family. I'm just so glad that law enforcement made the connections and they managed to get justice for Teresa and her family. If you enjoyed this story today, guys, please give us a little like, maybe a comment, subscribe, and thank you so much for watching and everybody subscribing. I will soon be back. Thank you. Random Jen.